Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Lynn Love. I'm a lecturer in computer arts at Abertay University and co-investigator on In-Game International. I'm interested in social play and how playing together helps people to form communities, and I've been looking at UK and Chinese interactions through video game play.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Xiaoxiong Xiong. I'm a PhD candidate in management at University of St. Andrews. I'm now an associate researcher at the In-Game International project. My research studies the internationalization motives, enablers, liabilities, and path of creative organizations, with a particular interest in Chinese gaming entities.
We're going to talk to you today about video game streaming and their communities of play in the UK and China. Video game streaming is where the live footage, so the screen share of a game being played, is streamed to an audience live online. Often the video game footage will be accompanied with a live camera feed of the person who is playing and narration of that person playing the game. The person who's playing the game is often called a streamer. They use their personality and also their skills as a player of games to attract viewers to their content. Video game streaming has grown significantly over the last 10 years, but in particular during the global pandemic. And you can see here that in the UK and USA, the three biggest video game streaming platforms are Twitch Gaming, YouTube Gaming, and Facebook Gaming. What's interesting about these UK-based platforms is they're not available in China. And when we start to think about Chinese and UK platforms and the potential for games developers and streamers to work between these two regions, we have to be kind of aware of the fact that the landscape is very different. In China, we have Huya, Douyu, and Tencent's own platform. These platforms are also available internationally, so you can access them from the UK. And it's important to note that actually streaming is seeing significant growth outside video gamings. So Twitch is reporting huge growth in its Just Chatting channel, for example. And live entertainment and pre-recorded content are also huge aspects of these different platforms as well. So I'm going to hand over to Xiaoxiong, who's going to talk to you about the landscape of video game streaming.
There are three groups of key stakeholders, namely content producer, content generator, and content distributor. Content producer could be understood as the owners of what will be streamed, for example, a game or an e-sport competition. Similarly, content generator refers to those who will actually initiate the streaming activity. They are often professional MCN agencies or individual streamers. Although many well-known game streamers are professional players, it is not a prerequisite. In fact, many streamers are amateur game players. Content distributor is rather self-explanatory, referring to streaming platforms. If we are to put these key stakeholders in diagram, they would be like this picture. The number of circles refers to the relative quantity of organizations or individuals within each group, while the size of the circle stands for their relative importance within their field, or to be more precise, the relative number of fans. For example, as you can see, content generator has many bubbles because one may easily find a huge number of streamers. Just in China, there are over 11 million game streamers in 2021, and their number of followers differ dramatically, ranging from millions of fans to just a few followers. But only the few top streamers enjoy the prestige of numerous followers, therefore only limited big circles. Same principle applies to content producer and content distributor. While we have identified the key stakeholders, it is also important to look at the streaming path, i.e., how a game or competition gets distributed. Well, most would be familiar with the linear path, such as line A from content producer to generator and then distributor. There is another path as well, that is from content producer to distributor and then generator. This usually happens when a content producer such as esports organizer grants streaming rights directly to a streaming platform. The platform will then decide streamer or MCN agency. However, it is also important to note that a content producer such as game studio may have many games that are distributed in various paths by various parties. In order not to overcomplicate the following narration, the errors will then be omitted, but please do bear in mind that Path A and Path B could happen to single producer simultaneously. If we are to visualize the streaming path of all the content producers in real practice, we might end up with a web-like diagram such as this. It is also important to point that any streaming allows the relevant party to establish connections. From this perspective, one can easily find that while some producers are distributed by various generators through different distributors and are therefore well established in multiple networks, there are also some with few or even no relations. For example, producer A is connected to many content generators and distributors. Producer B has very limited connections, whereas producer C has no connection at all. If we compare these three producers, it is highly likely that producer A will reach a greater range of viewers more easily than producer B and C, because building from network perspective, which holds that markets are webs of networks where organizations and individuals are connected to one another. It is believed that insidership is a necessary but insufficient condition. Any party without a strong position in these networks are likely to suffer from liability of outsidership. In this case, producer B and C. Liability of outsidership proposed by Johansson and Vaughan is a classic concept in international business, which refers to the challenges incurred by being outside the networks in the host country. However, from previous narration, I think it is fair to extend the concept to game streaming as well. In this case, we could define liability of outsidership as any extra challenges and costs an organization suffer to get viewership than those inside important and or multiple streaming networks.
But this raises another question, that is, who or what kind of organizations are more likely to be insider or outsider for game streaming? To answer this question, it might be easier to identify the characteristics of the likely insider, that is, producer A in this case. First, companies with games that have already received extensive interest and popularity might find it easier to build connections with content generators and distributors, possibly because by streaming such content, the streamer or the streaming platform will also benefit from easier and wider range of viewers. However, it is also worth noting that there might be country or regional differences. For instance, in China, many game streaming is about Reign of Valor and League of Legends, whereas the top streamed games in the West are Apex Legends and Fortnite. Second, insiders are more likely to be those with extensive existing ties. A clear example will be Tencent. Not only does it have a stake in many gaming organizations, it has been establishing connections with many content generators, such as China's largest MCN Xiaoxiong and many influential distributors, including but not limited to Huya and Bilibili as well. In contrast, Outsiders are more likely to be companies with games that haven't attracted popularity or interest, or those with few existing ties, which are often new gaming organizations or foreign entities. This, however, raises another important question, that is, what could be done to mitigate the liability of outsidership in game streaming? First and foremost, game per se should always be the priority because, as has been narrated previously, popular games are more likely to be streamed by streamers and streaming platforms voluntarily. However, psychic distance needs to be considered when expanding to a foreign country. Psychic distance is defined by Johansson and Paul as any factors that prevent the flow of information from one country to another. This may include political, cultural, or social factors such as language and regulatory difference. In terms of games where cultural element might abound, one should also pay attention to whether that element could be understood and appreciated by the foreign market. Where it is also important to pay attention to platform differences. Where mobile games constitute about 76% of all game revenue in China, the percentage is much lower elsewhere, especially in the West. The US is 35%, UK is 29%, where Germany is even much lower, with only 25% coming from mobile games. Therefore, how to transform the game from one platform to another without losing its appeal should also be considered. Second would be to establish connections with other parties. The most commonly used method would be traditional cooperation models such as making investment, acquisition, establishing joint ventures, or other business cooperation arrangement. However, this might be resource and capital demanding and therefore not available to all firms. Fortunately for game streaming, we have a unique solution, that is to establish and make use of community of play, which Dr. Lynn will explain in detail what that is and how it is supposed to mitigate the liability of outsidership in game streaming.
Thank you, Xiaoxiong. You can see that there's a symbiotic relationship that exists between the content producers, the content generators, and the content distributors, and that these are important to be able to navigate the liability of outsidership. That the content generator undertake an activity which is play as work. So rather than playing video games for leisure, it becomes their day-to-day job. They generate revenue through their playing, and their play style, their play personality, and approach becomes very important in terms of building an audience, because building the audience helps them to generate revenue. If they build a large enough audience, then they become really appealing to content producers and content distributors, as Xiaoxiong showed through the diagrams in the previous slides. Ultimately, what we're suggesting is that accessing the audience is important because the audience is the key to generating income for all players in the landscape. Just like the content generator is undertaking play as work, the revenue models for streaming platforms are based mostly on audience work. So the work of the audience in taking part in a participatory community around streaming can contribute to the revenue of the content generator and distributor. And the models that the content distributor create in terms of how they design their platform and the opportunities they give the audience in order to interact with the platform, which is mediated by monetary transactions, then leads to revenue. So there are 4 different ways that a content generator and content distributor tends to make revenue across streams, and these models are the same for UK and for China. So there are traditional models of revenue, so advertising and partnerships with brands or promoted products and things like that. So subscriptions is another model, which has a regular payment revenue where audience members pay to be part of an exclusive community around a particular streamer. Then there's a more varied form of revenue, which is through digital gifting and donations and virtual cheers. And this is a regular revenue stream where audience members choose to reward a streamer for particular behaviour, or they pay for special emojis or emotes, or they pay to influence what's happening on the stream. And then, of course, there's another traditional form of revenue generation through merchandise. So you can see here that the community is very important to streaming because audience work is a huge part of the way that revenue is created. So a community of play relies on a concept of insidership. So it deals with liability of outsidership to an extent, and it's often applied to the playing of a game. So Bernie de Koven introduced this idea in the Well Played Game, and he said that a community of play forms around playing a game when a community develops shared interactions, shared experiences, and find that they enjoy playing together. So the community of play applies somewhat to streaming communities because what we see happening is that we have a participatory community where the audience is taking part and interacting with the stream through a whole bunch of different modes, which, as I said previously, are kind of mediated by the revenue models of streaming platforms. And they develop these sorts of shared experiences in language and behaviours in a streaming community. Really, what this sort of community participation does around a stream is it allows a bond between individuals inside the community. It promotes further interaction with the community, and it sort of encourages stickiness, sort of returning to that community and that streamer. Where streamer communities differ a little bit is due to these monetization models. The design of a platform shapes the way that a community and a streamer can interact with one another, and it leads to different hierarchies and also dependencies within the community, which differ from a traditional community of play, which tends to sort of operate on a somewhat flat hierarchy. What the community get in return for their financial contribution allows them agency and sort of an active role inside the community, and a social hierarchy develops from this because really, if you can afford to pay, you can have more esteem, you can be seen more, and you can have greater interaction with the streamer. And what that means is that instead of all players and viewers being seen as being equal, you have a social hierarchy that develops where those who can afford to play have a greater opportunity to participate. But you can see how actually the models that the streaming platform provide in terms to generate revenue and the rewards that they give to the community shapes the community interaction. And one thing that we want to look at moving forward with the study is to understand how inside a community those with financial freedom feel about these models, and those who do not have the financial freedom to participate, how that shapes their participation, understanding and feeling of connection to the community. So as you can see, our research is still in progress. We feel that the liability of outsidership is a very helpful model for understanding the different relationships in the streaming landscape, and will also hopefully be helpful for content producers and content generators who are interested in moving across different regions and creating connections in new spaces. We think tapping into content generators or popular streamers is a really good way to navigate the liability of outsidership because they're a direct link to the audience. We've also found this symbiotic relationship that exists between the content generator, the content producer, and the content distributor, and how it relies so heavily on play as work and also audience work and the community. And we propose that the community of play is a model that helps us to understand why audiences would be motivated to engage with streams, but also that the models developed by streaming platforms in terms of monetization makes a community a commodity. It changes and shapes the interactions within a community and can create a social hierarchy and a cycle of dependencies that can be kind of difficult to navigate. So moving forward from here, we're going to undertake interviews with streamers in the UK and in China to greater understand their experiences and their interactions with communities and how monetization models change and shape what they do. And also we're going to undertake further enhanced surveys of the community to understand whether these different social hierarchies do exist and what influence or impact they have. And we hope by looking at UK and China and gathering further data, we'll be able to differentiate between the behaviours across these two markets to shed further light on opportunities for content producers and content generators who would like to engage cross-region.